as you have seen the title for the workshop, what I wanted to present today is gender equality and global issues intersections. And of course, if the slides go, okay. I'll introduce myself first as well. I'm Lavinia Rotundi, and I'm gender equality ambassador for Etherea. But also, just to let you know a bit about myself, I'm Italian, but I'm currently based in Brussels, and I'm working for an NGO for disability rights, but also I volunteer for women's rights, and I'm very passionate about advocating for equal rights in general, and of course, specifically gender equality. Okay, I can read the chat, so which is amazing. Actually, I just realized that now. And I see hi Annalise and how hi Leah from Florida. Wow, that's great. On the other side, basically from where I am, but it's amazing you're following from there. Yeah, if you want to introduce yourself more, go ahead. But I just wanted to give a little bit of introduction about myself, and I've been passionate about gender equality for a long time. So I'm very happy to be here and just have some reflections together and to go a little bit more into deep into the topic. I also want to give a very short introduction about Etherea. I guess you might be already familiar on what Etherea does, but just to let you know a little bit better, Etherea is innovative education platform for youth ages 15-30, fusing the emerging technology like AI, psychology, and cutting-edge research from leaders around the world to drive personal growth and global change. They have different themes that they focus on and other global issues areas, and one of them is gender equality. And also, Etherea offers an immersive mission-based learning through animated AR worlds, global challenges, volunteer opportunities, and access to many resources. I also would like to share what is the purpose of this workshop. This session offers a structured overview of how gender equality is shaped by broader global systems. For example, understanding how gender equality intersects with other global issues. I'll also will examine some scenarios overlapping inequalities and also purpose is to identify the barriers and systematic challenges and explore strategies to build more inclusive and intersectional movements. And here, if you would like to participate in the chat, I would like to ask you, before I actually define what it is, I want to ask from you if you are familiar with the concept of intersectionality, and if you are, what that means for you. Before I go ahead, if you would like to share in the chat, I'll appreciate to start the conversation. I give it like few seconds. Guess you already a response from Annalise. Yes, like intersecting identities or issues. And Leah shares the weaving of different elements. I guess you're quite already familiar with the concept from what you're saying. I'll go ahead. So I just want to introduce very shortly what is intersectionality. Intersectionality is a concept that was introduced by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, if I pronounce it well, I hope. But you might, I don't know if you ever heard of the scholar, but she introduced the concept of intersectionality for the first time, and is described as how different dimensions of a person's identity interact simultaneously. And this means that these different dimensions could be gender, class, sexuality, disability, ethnicity, race, migration status, socioeconomic status, a lot of things that intersect together and And here I want to say this all intersection of identity can lead either to systematic barriers or another side, privileges um, in the world. And that's here I want to bring also a quick reflection to you. If you can think about two aspects of your identity that shape your opportunities or your barriers, if you would like to share, otherwise just think about it by yourself, it's okay. I'll give you as well again a few seconds to think about these two aspects. How do you think that your identity intersect with systematic challenges, or on the other side, opportunities? Um, please, if you want to also, as again, turn on your mic and just say it, but I also the chat is perfectly fine and I read it. I read comment from Annalise, my race and gender as a woman of color. I can also I'll do it by myself, the reflection. So well, if you want to share in the chat what I think about usually on the barriers that I encounter on a daily basis as a woman, of course, and as also as a person in the neurodiverse spectrum. I see a lot of barriers every day, but on the other side, I recognize also my opportunities by living where I live in Europe, by being, say, European, by having education, and of course also white privilege. So this gives a little bit of this spectrum of identities that create barriers, but at the same time, of course, also challenges. Sorry, opportunities. Want to read your comments. Leah says, I agree also with my ability may have problems with accessibility to opportunities, and I'm also an Asian American woman. And Sylvia shares, opportunities are my education and barriers are same. My race and gender as a woman color. Thank you so much, by the way, for sharing all of this in the chat. I really appreciate. And I think it starts to bring reflections on how our identity is shaped, but most of the time is mostly like the society who kind of gives us as well, like shapes us with the barriers and that come from identity. So I'll go ahead. I just want to also give a bit of introduction in general on gender equality, where are we standing. I also want to say this is probably mostly a European perspective, because it's the a place where I live. But feel free again to share in the chat as well. If you're coming from different places in the world, I'm sure there are different kind of barriers and gaps that I'm very happy to read in the chat. So let's saying this as is always combined as was saying identity, how it is intersect from my perspective, living where I do. So gender equality, where we stand, as you might by me as you might be familiar. There are still many persistent economic gaps. There is a lot of under in representation in leadership, career responsibilities, career responsibilities are still very uneven. Structural discrimination remains. And I think one of the biggest challenge right now, at least again, for where I live in Europe, is the technology facilitated violence. But I'm pretty sure it's an issue that it's coming all across the world. But for sure, it's an emerging challenge, and I think it's really getting visible and more visible, and standing at the same place of the other issues. But I'm pretty sure it's a problem just all over the world, unfortunately. So yeah, I brought a little bit of data, but again, I'm saying it's mostly a European perspective where women still earn less per hour than men, and there is still a big employment rate gap, which is of 10% in Europe. But again, if you want to share in the chat, please go ahead from where you're coming from. And yeah, this is just to give a general overview of where we are standing right now. Now I want to bring how intersecting systems shape and gender equality. Gender outcomes are shaped by overlapping systems, disability and accessibility, socioeconomic status, migration, ethnicity, language and culture, access to technology, and global inequalities. And here I brought a few examples how gender, together with another identity, another part of identity of a person, but actually a person is made with so many different aspects into identity. So I'm just trying to go like gender and in this case, for example, disability, but of course, gender and disability can intersect as well with migration or with class, with anything else. So all this, of course, parts of the identity intersect together, but I'm trying to focus now just to gender and another part of identity to have a little bit of more in-depth focus on how this intersect together. So women with disability or other than experiencing gender inequality as women, they also experience systemic barriers like inaccessible communication, which could be at work and education, in many different settings, underrepresentation in leadership and consultations, especially in the institutions, I'll say, but also barriers to access employment and career progression, limited access to assistive technologies and inclusive communication. They are also, other than just stigmatized as persons with disabilities, they are also very often infantilized as such. There are also obstacles in reporting violence and having access to justice because of the lack of accessible communication. There is an accessibility to healthcare services and also a lack of accessible childcare and family support services. And also very, very important on this specific, I'll say that accessibility is a precondition to equal participation. What does that mean? That as a woman already with systematic barriers to face, um, there are even more overlapping barriers by facing a lack of accessibility in many different sectors, which even more will be an obstacle to an equal participation in society. And for example, the case of violence, women with disabilities are even more likely to face violence, but due to the lack of accessibility in communication, I'm saying communication, but it could be also, I don't I was thinking about bringing this example. I'll say that I was thinking about it mostly women with hearing loss or deaf because it's what I'm familiar with from my work. But also, of course, there are many different kind of disabilities that can be visible or invisible. It can be physical in many different way. So that's why I mention a lot of accessibility and communication, which is very important. And what I want to say is that with the lack of accessibility, it's even more difficult to have access, for example, to justice and report violence, which means also there's even more lack of data on, but also even more likelihood to encounter even more violence because of lack of reporting. There are many issues that intersect between gender and disability, bringing even more systematic barriers to society and equal participation. I want to go to the next example, which I think is not too different from what I've said before. But since I know that lately there's a lot of, I think if you are familiar with maybe social media and everything, there's a lot of awareness, which I'm very happy for, on neurodiversity. I wanted to bring this as well because I think it's very important to talk about it, which is usually quite invisible, being a person with neurodiversity. And especially in the case of women, there is a lack, a lack of diagnosis, or instead misdiagnosis because of the masking of women since they are children, and also a lot of research is based mostly on young boys, which means that this brings to a lack of treatment for women with neurodiversity. And I'm saying neurodiversity just to use it as an umbrella. Of course, this can be women with ADHD, women with autism, anything you can think of under the umbrella of neurodiversity. And as I wrote here, the how these two intersect, a lot of misdiagnosis due to gender stereotypes. Masking is usually driven by social and gender norms. Inaccessible communication still in schools, workplaces, and as we've seen before, on where we stand on gender equality. We know that there is a big employment gap already, so with inaccessible communication, even more women in this case and with neurodiversity are facing even more struggles with accessing employment, or also they might access employment but prefer a job that is part-time, for example, because neurodiversity might bring, as I said here, a higher risk of mental health and burnout. Also, barriers to have access to reasonable accommodation. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but reasonable accommodation means to have like an adjustment to your needs while you are working, in a sense that your workplace should, once they are aware of, for example, disability, neurodiversity, your needs in general, they should find a way to accommodate this to make you thrive in your workplace, and this doesn't happen many times. Uh, and yes, also I wrote barriers to informed consent, because sometimes I think this is also related to not just neurodiversity, but also women with intellectual disabilities. They are very likely to face, for example, forced sterilization, but in general, also for other medical treatment, it's very important to have documents that are easy to read, for example, very clear instructions. And without this, women with, in this case, neurodiversity, or as I was saying, also intellectual disabilities, are even more likely either to face violence or not to equally participate for their own decisions. And as, again, structural exclusion from justice systems. So again, another barrier to even more report violence. If you, I saw there was something in the chat, now I want to read it. Sylvia wrote, I'm not disabled, but experience infantilization, I think, on a daily basis by neighbors, especially if you think I'm younger than I am in at work. And Lee also commented, that's an interesting additional identity intersection. Age and gender is another thing. Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with your comments. I'm very happy to read that. And yeah, as well, age. Age can be another part of identity that intersect with the rest. Um, yeah, that's a perfect example. I wanted to bring also, of course, one of the global issues that we know unfortunately is rising and rising, and it's the climate crisis. Women and girls face structurally higher climate risks due to gender roles, socioeconomic inequalities, and limited access to resources. And this leads to reduced access to climate resilient healthcare and emergency information, increased risk during displacement, which includes also gender-based violence. It is even more likely to happen. Limited access to land rights, credit, insurance, and recovery funds, higher domestic energy and food insecurity. Women are still very underrepresented in climate governance and resilience, which means that it's difficult to bring even more the voices of women if they are unrepresented. Inaccessible emergency plans and risk communication for women with disabilities. Again, it's impossible not to intersect the identities, so that's why I'm repeating um, parts of identity that they overlap. And structural barriers in mobility, shelter, evacuation, communication, and resource allocation. Another example that I wanted to bring, of course, migration is another global challenge that we know about. But in the specific case with gender, um, migrant and refugee women face structural barriers shaped by gender, legal status, and socioeconomic inequality, which leads to language barriers in healthcare, justice, and public services, documentation and mobility restrictions, concentration in informal, low-paid sectors, higher risk of exploitation and unsafe working conditions, barriers again to report violence due to fear or the diversity of language and status, discrimination in housing, work, and public institutions, and even more higher exposure to poverty, social exclusion, and unstable living conditions. I'm trying to, okay. All right. As well, I was trying to look at the chat and everything. Um, because with the slide it's a bit complicated, and I see the layout keeps changing somehow, but it's all good. Okay, and I just saw a comment from Annalise. Such great insight. Really interesting to examine all these different intersections that I never thought of. Well, it's amazing. Thank you so much, Annalise. I really appreciate the comments. And please, as you have said before, if you want to share more that you, I don't know, experience, so or can think about, go ahead. It's very welcoming here. Just like I'm just trying to bring examples to open these reflections on how um, parts of one person identities can intersect and bring barriers to society. And this is another that I wanted to bring, gender and technology facilitated violence, especially with I think a merging of tools related to AI, generative AI, which keeps evolving and evolving. I think it's a very important topic, and it's also not very addressed, I think, yet in the institutions as it should be, at least in the sense of it lacks usually a gender perspective on the topic. Um, and so I wanted to bring that, although um, there are many instruments that now just keeps advancing with AI. There is also a lot of risk for women that are higher to their security as well. Also, just having higher barriers and amplifying even more gaps that are already existing. And for example, digital spaces reproduce and amplify gender inequalities. It's the case of harassment, threats, and gendered hate speech, non-consensual image sharing, sexual extortion, and doxing, sexualized deepfakes, manipulated images, and AI-enabled impersonation. And I want to just stop a little bit on this, on the sexualized deepfakes. It's one of the topics that I recently researched on, and um, I made a little bit of research on the topic, so I like just to I wanted to mention this as something that is extremely related to the use of AI, and it's not regulated yet, and it's also um, as such, and it's another form of gender-based violence, of course, under the cyber violence. And with the AI, it's something that keeps just emerging and merging even more as an issue. And it's so easy, unfortunately, to develop these fakes, and so difficult, unfortunately, to actually cancel them from the internet. And this is, I think, AI as an intersection here of the issue of gender, let's say, and AI at this point. I mean, there are so many different, of course, of forms of cyber violence, but in this case, I'm just focusing a little bit on the AI. Again, there is also a gender digital divide, which means that um, you might know already that, of course, women are also less represented in the tech field, which means that also for AI, um, women are underrepresented in the way that it's developed and trained, which means that AI it's not made safe by design for women, or at least there is still a lot of work to do in a way that AI can, I mean, the industry of AI can um, actually consider the challenges that it brings for women. And so I need of a gender perspective to make these AI tools safe for women as well. Again, limited legal recognition, there is uneven enforcement and lack of prosecution because of how difficult it is to prosecute, unfortunately, this kind of crimes, um, for all the anonymity, but also in general, lack of legislation and lack of gender perspective in the legislation related to AI. And here, again, as I'm thinking from a European perspective of what's going on in the institutions, from the EU AI Act, which lacks a gender perspective. I don't know if in your where you are living there are any legislations AI, if there is any perspective from gender, please share in the chat. But this comes from my reflection based on where I am living right now. Algorithm amplifying sexist content with the rise of manosphere spaces. I don't know if you are familiar with what manosphere means, but it's an umbrella of to define those spaces that are mostly um, they're mostly say spaces with men mostly that um, are most of the time unsafe for women because this kind of spaces tend to reproduce a lot of gender stereotypes, which are harmful for men as well. These spaces are not, I'll say that they're not safe for anyone, but most of the time, as they are emerging, they are also increasing the online radicalization of young boys, which means that, of course, as it's also harmful for them. But now I'm focusing on the women's side. It also keeps amplifying all the sexist content that we see online, as there are content creators that see this as an opportunity to kind of benefit from all these stereotypes and also just have a more financial return out of this. And I see in the comment exactly. Sylvia shares, I agree, the rise of Andrew Tate. Yeah, that's one example, but there are so many, of course. And super sexist influencer is an example in the UK. That's a big problem as well, as sexualizing women on show like Love Island, and men now expecting all women to look like and be like the women on those shows. I think sexual harassment has risen a lot in the UK too. I have experienced a lot of that recently. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for sharing all of this. But yes, exactly. Because here, technology facilitated violence doesn't stop to online, which is already a form of violence to experience, but then it's just a continuum to the offline violence. Um, it's not stopping just in the online spaces, but also it increases the violence outside. And there are also, I haven't mentioned here, but I'm sorry, I don't want to focus just on this, but this is one of my main topics of research and interest. But there are also, unfortunately, emerging cases of just young boys who commit crimes against women. They are also called under the term of misogynist terrorists because they want to attack like women after being in these spaces that unfortunately um, made them learn a lot of hate and resentment against women as the main, let's say, issue of the harm that they feel from the toxic masculinity. But actually, the problem again, it's the gender stereotypes and but these spaces try to um, just fuel a lot of hatred and find a category of people to put the resentment towards. And content creators are the first people to try to benefit from this, unfortunately. And then, as again, another example of how this also have an impact outside of the online. I mean, it can be both online and offline. Silencing effect on public participation, leadership, and civic engagement, as we've seen before. Women are already a lot underrepresented in public spaces, and having to face also harassment online. This pushed them even more not to engage in public spaces and brings also a silencing effect. There are cases, for example, of journalists. There are some data from the UNESCO, you can check, where like journalists who silence themselves after facing harassment online. Um, and here I want just to let's reconnect the whole intersection. So, across disability, socioeconomic status, climate, and migration, we see recurring structural patterns like systemic barriers, unequal access to resources, underrepresentation in decision-making spaces, greater exposure to poverty, instability, health risks, barriers reporting violence or discrimination, and increased vulnerability for even more marginalized communities like women with disabilities, racialized women, migrant women, and LGBTQ plus communities. And here, for my very short, of course, like experience, um, so far from my activist work and also volunteering, I wanted to bring just a few strategies that I think are very important to keep building intersectional movements and spaces, which I think is extremely important. First of all, it's very important to center marginalized voices, as we mentioned so far, could be women with disabilities, women in the lower class, women that are racialized, many different examples. There are so many, of course, so I'm not bringing all of them, but just to say that it's very, very important to center their voices because they don't face just gender issues as women, but as we were saying, for example, the problem of accessibility, they even face further obstacles just to report the violence that they experience, but also in employment. So it's very, very important to listen to those voices. And yeah, so saying, I think second, make accessibility it's not a negotiable thing because without accessibility, equal participation as reachable for so many women. So it's very, very important. And I think this um, has to be more of that intersectional movements because um, a lot of these spaces, unfortunately, lack of it. Sometimes I know it's also a lack of funding resources, but again, it's very important. Otherwise, it's impossible to bring the voices of marginalized people if the spaces aren't accessible and their voice will keep not being represented. Again, third, integrate intersectional analysis and data collection. Very, very important because a lot of data lack of intersectional analysis and um, all these different categories of identities as we've seen so far. Most of the time, data collection is very reduced or limited, I think, from what I've seen at least in my researches. Um, it's mostly based on the gender and lacks all these different aspects of identity, which instead it's very, very important because we could see even more which are the issues that certain categories faces and how this is intersected. It's very, very important, but there's still a lot of lack of this. Promote representation and participation, of course. Representation is extremely important and strengthen cross-movement alliances because, as we've seen, many of these aspects intersect with each other. So having even more alliances is helpful to bring these issues and raise more awareness on the intersections of different gender issues and build safe by design technology. Since I mentioned the AI and how technology and gender intersect, I wanted to mention also it's very, very important to build a safe by design technology, but how to do it. Of course, we need more representation of marginalized voices in those spaces in the tech field. And just a few takeaways from all the things that I've been talking about. Gender equality, the shape by overlapping systems, structural barriers drive unequal outcomes, inaccessible environments reproduce exclusion across sectors, intersectionality reveals who is most affected and why. Inclusive movements require shared leadership, accessibility, and cross-sector alliances, and policy change must address systems, services, justice, healthcare, labor, and digital rights and most even more than this. Of course, this is based on what I mentioned. And last, I wanted to bring positive reflections from all these things that I've been talking about that you also have been sharing in the chat. I wanted to ask you, I really appreciate any answer in the chat, or again, if you want to turn on your mic, camera, whatever you like. I appreciate if you want to share. First question. What part of today's session felt most relevant to your experience or context? Which intersections do you recognize in your own community or workplace? And what long-term shift would you like to see in the systems around you? Feel free to respond any of this, all of them, up to you. It's just to open reflection, and I'll give like 1 minute, 2 minutes, so I can read in the chat if you write anything about it.
Hi, can I say something? Can you hear me?
Yes, please. I can, the microphone is a little bit low, but I can hear a bit.
Oh, sorry. 1 second. I just turn off my I've got my headphones on. That's why. Um, Sorry, is that any better? Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
good now.
okay.
Great.
I'm so sorry. sorry for the delay there. Yeah, thank you so much for the session. It was really good. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it just really is opening my eyes to um because I never really think about these things that much, but then when somebody brings these things up, I realize, okay, this is what's going on around me. And what um I think that what I see the most is the lack of representation, I think it was, or something like that, where I feel like women don't feel like they can speak up anymore as much. I've just seen it a lot in the UK. Like I was in the Middle East for 3 years, moved back to the UK, and I feel like the UK completely changed. Like media has changed the way people are. I feel like because of all these shows like Love Island and things like that, where women can come across as quite dumbed down, if that makes sense. Like women being smart and having a voice. A lot of men don't like that um anymore. I really feel that at the moment, and um men just wanting women to be just bimbos and like, it's nice to look nice and stuff and to dress up, but also if you have um an opinion to be able to actually voice that. But I feel like a lot of women's voices are being suppressed at the moment, which is really sad. Because I didn't expect that when I came back to the UK. Um, but yeah, it's just I really see this whole and then seeing the Andrew Tate stuff online. It's just horrific. It's really horrific because, I just think when I have kids, I hope my kids don't have to, are not subjected to influences like that. And he's been accused of rape, but young boys still listen to him. It's actually horrifying. So just things like that, I guess. Yeah. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
No, no, thank you so much for sharing. No, thank you. No,
Yeah.
no, definitely appreciate it. And yes, absolutely. That's a growing problem. And I understand it's really a challenge to in general to I'll say like both genders in different ways, of course. Of course, there are higher risk for women on the safety side. And it's
Mm.
definitely an emerging problem. And I think it's also it's a sort of like intersection of backlash of women having, let's say, a bit more voice finally in public spaces, and on the other side, this sort of content creators try to use this and bring try to build resentment from young boys, just which are of course very vulnerable at that age. So it's very easy to manipulate them based on their emotions and how they feel like about society, because of course they are raised um, as men, so they'll face their gender stereotypes and everything like that, and they are trying, like to bring this frustration into instead women, and even more, yes, unfortunately fueling on the violence and silencing the voices that now are trying actually to find emerge. And it's a big challenge. And yeah, thank you.
It's scary, and it's scary. And also in the UK, there are race riots as well. So there've been riots against immigrants coming in the country, but a lot of racist people are using that as an excuse to just be really racist. And there's a lot of young men doing it, a lot of young white men, British men. And what I found is when I came back from the Middle East in 2020, um, I've been sexually harassed a lot since I came back to the UK by younger boys. Like I'm in my 30s, but there's younger boys and mainly white boys and white men who have been harassing me. Also white men who are my age. I don't think I've been sexually harassed by a single man of color since I moved back here. Only white men. And I'm an Asian woman. Like the kind of Kim Kardashian kind of color, Spanish kind of color, I guess. But I think I don't know what's going on. I think that women are being of color being fetishized or something in the media. I don't know what it is, but I've it's really, really affected me really badly because I live in a mainly white area as well. So when I go out, I have headphones on, but it's been happening almost, every other day. And I just get really scared. I look younger than my age as well, so I get younger people doing it, and um, yeah, it's just really difficult. I'm becoming a feminist now because of all this. That's it.
No, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much. And you even brought another extremely relevant issue that I've been seeing as well. Asian women are, yeah, they are fetishized in the media a lot. So absolutely, that's another issue there. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I want to read and unless there is anyone, just go ahead with the mic on and say um, anything you want to share. But I read also the on the chat because I've seen a little bit of comments. Leah shared, I think tech, disability, and climate are most relevant intersection if I had to choose, and all extremely interesting to see laid out. Annalise said, love this whole workshop. Thank you so much. It's actually I think my ever first workshop, so I hope it's all going well. It's a bit of training for me right now. I hope everything work out. If you want to also share anything in the chat on feedback, please go ahead, of course. But thank you. Appreciate. Thank you for setting this up. I hope to share this with others in my community if this is being recorded. From what I know, it's recorded, so might be a chance. Also agree with Sylvia's points. The whole manosphere is a big issue, and more young men than you think actually listen. Oh, yes. I hope I pronounce it well. If not, please, I'm sorry. And if you want to say out loud the name, I appreciate, but I hope it's a right the way I pronounce it. Lavender, Lavender, shares that strategies for intersectional movement session is most relevant to my experience because it's where we're supposed to focus more in order not to lose the game since it's been long crying without change. Now let's focus more on solutions like this. Um, okay, from South Africa. Wow, it's amazing. So many people across the world. It's very interesting and very nice to know. But yeah, absolutely. As I was saying before, I think it's very, very important trying to bring as much as possible intersectionality in spaces that are trying already to be safe, in this case for women, but could be also for another topic like climate or anything. I think this kind of spaces should even more encourage to have multiple voices and not to just focus on the topic without having other perspectives that it could be gender, could be disability, could be anything else. But all these things have to go together. Otherwise, we are just, I think, keep reproducing barriers, or there will always be some voices that are left out. So I really agree and think that places that are trying to be intersectional, please try even more, if that makes sense. I know it's a challenge. It's complicated to do that as well, um, but I think it's a need. Anyway, I think we are very close to conclusion of the workshop. So if you want to share anything else in the chat, I think we have like 5 minutes left. So if you want to share anything else, um, either with the mic on or in the chat, go ahead. I see there are some links shared in the chat, so if you please check out the other workshops, sign up also for the other people who will have very interesting workshops on other topics, or and also the sign up link for the Etherea platform. I also want to just thank you so much. Before everything is concluded, I just want to thank you a lot for listening to me, for just being involved into the workshop and also all your comments in the chat. a lot. I appreciate a lot. Thank you for sharing anything from your personal experience or personal reflection. It was amazing. And I'm very happy to hear all these thoughts and people actually with me and you sharing very similar thoughts. It's very encouraging for our future, I'll say. If you want to reach out to me for anything, I shared my contacts here in the slide, my email, or I'm on LinkedIn, of course. Unfortunately, I'll say, and then no, but I am there. So if you want to reach out for anything, go ahead. Um, but yes, for anything, I don't know, any questions or any, I don't know if you also have any project you are working on and you want to share. I'm very happy to contribute together on anything. Very open to any of these topics that I shared here. So if you, I don't know, want to reach out for anything, I'm very, very happy to be involved in anything that you are doing or just also being informed on anything. I'm also happy to just know more about what I've been like talking. There's always more to learn. So, and I was also saying also my perspective is based on where I've been living, from my identity and everything. But there's so much to learn from. So I'm very happy to learn even more on anything that I mentioned so far. If you have any interesting document that you have been working on, what you want to share, go ahead. I really appreciate.